For today's video, let's take a look at Luminar Neo. Now, maybe you don't have Photoshop and Lightroom, which for, I believe it's $10 a month for a photographer. I don't see a reason why you wouldn't. However, not everybody likes those tools, and some people have other things that they like to get presets and just like the editing features in. So today we're going to talk about Luminar Neo. Now, the big thing about Neo is you buy it, but you'll notice that you have this purchased thing here where you can buy other presets. Just like you can for Lightroom, you can buy presets for Luminar Neo. And they have some at the top that they will recommend. And just like in Photoshop, you can walk your way through them and see what you like and what you don't like about that one, and maybe use it as a starting point. But we're not here to talk about the different presets today. What we're going to do is we're going to go up here to the top and go to Edit. Now, what this does is it brings up a series of tools that they have, and then you can modify those tools as well. But let's take a look and go through some of what we might want to do. So let's look at the sky one. Now, unfortunately, the sky that they have in here is a replacement of the sky. So we can replace the clouds. Give it a bright blue sky of some kind. And you'll see that the sky has now changed. So let's get rid of that one. No, revert. Let's look at the enhance. So I'd like that sky to be a little bit more blue. So let's see what the enhancer will do for us here. And we've got a little bit more of a blue sky than we had before. So let's go down here to the creative ones. Now, down here in professional, they have the highlights broken out by the contrast broken out by highlights, midtones, and shadows. And sometimes it's just a matter of working with them to see which one is going to be the best. Now, this is a cannon firing, obviously. And in the clouds, you can see these little bits of material. And I'd like to enhance that cloud and give it more texture because it seems kind of flat in this image. So if we grab the highlights and pull it up, we can almost get rid of the cloud. Nah, we don't want to do that. Let's go to the midtones and pull it up. Yeah, doesn't do much. How about shadows? Again, not really doing a lot for what we want. Let's pull the highlights up just a bit to give it a little bit of kick. And you always have these eyeballs over here, so you can turn off that particular effect and see what it did. And you can see they did give a little bit more kick to the cloud and give it a little more depth. Of course, you've got color harmony down here where you can modify your colors. So let's pull this up to about midpoint and turn it off and turn it on. And you see it brought some more vibrance to the colors. So we're getting closer. Now, This is another one of those artificial bokehs, and I'm not doing a portrait for this particular one, but you can use this to change and blur out the backgrounds, which is probably not going to do much for us here because it doesn't have any faces or anything to focus on. And just kind of blurs out everything except the photographer here in the front, who happens to be the only thing masked out. Now you can't go through here and do masks, etc., but we're going to ignore that for right now. Go look in the develop. Now this is bright sunlight. So let's see what happens if we pull back the exposure just a little bit. And basically what I'm looking to do is just bring the colors up a little bit more and darken that sky so it looks more of a dark blue. We also do noise reduction in here. But again, anytime you do a reduction, typically what it does is it takes away some of the detail of the image. Like you can see, there's pretty good amount of detail in here for the grass. And by reducing it or anything similar to that type of technique, what it's going to do is it's going to blur that out because you're going to lose some of the detail to it. Same thing happens if we were to upscale the image. It doesn't have enough detail to really do an upscale. What it's going to end up doing is instead modifying that image to make things a little less sharp, but to give you that larger image. We go into details. You notice we have small, medium, and large details. So let's pull back in on the cloud. And you'll notice there's a bunch of little details in here. This isn't spots on the lens. This is actually bits of the wadding that got blown out during the explosion. And you can see that looks kind of grainy if we do that one. Unlike Lightroom, double clicking does not put it back to a default. If you run everything to default, you can just hit that. Which basically defaulted everything back to where it was and erased everything that we did, which is not what I would consider to be the appropriate response of the application, especially seeing as you've got the eyeball that you can turn off the individual things. I would rather it not erase everything that I've done when I hit the reset button for that tool. I would expect it to do just that panel and not do the rest of it. So that's something to keep in mind when you're looking at making modifications in Neo. It will take everything out. I don't think we have any large details we need to do. Now, again, remember, if you go the opposite direction, you've got to blur things. So just bring the details up just a little bit. Well, it does look like it made much of a change at all. Let's pull it up just a little bit more. Again, use your button over here to turn things on and off. I'm not seeing a lot of changes made to that. Now, some of these creative things are kind of like a adjustable preset. All right. So if we turn that all the way up and back it out, look what we ended up with. This is what they consider to be dramatic. There's also move, mystical, glow. Again, these are more like a preset than they are an actual setting. In that what it's doing is it's got an idea of changes it wants to make, and it's going to make those changes. And now that I made changes with here, I'm not happy with the exposure. which I'd pulled down before, and now I have to pull back up again because of the rollback that I did. If you're a fan of the old film photography, you'll remember that there was grain in it, and you can dial that up or dial that down. You can also change the size and roughness of that grain, so you can back that off and just put a little bit of grain in. And make it kind of tiny, but I was never a fan of grain. Then there's more things you can do here from a portrait standpoint. We'll take those out of the way. Again, if you denoise something, it will blur it just a little bit because it's trying to clean up the image. So this is what we have so far. Honestly, this is not my style. So we're going to go grab one of these that has the ability to roll the tool back, which all seems to be gone now. Rather interesting. There we go. Okay. But as you can see, the image still doesn't look like what we started with. And so it's rolling back, but it's not rolling everything back. We're going to take it back to the original image. Now, what I wanted to do was bring up that sky. So we're going to go to the enhance a little bit. We're going to pull that sky enhancer up to about mid. And it just adds that little bit more darkness to the sky. And the reason I didn't go too much on that is because I want to go develop and I want to back off the exposure just a bit, which will, by default, make that sky look a little bit darker on its own. I wasn't happy with the contrast, but I believe Develop has a contrast in it as well, so let's pull that up just a bit there. And you'll notice the change that I made is gone. So maybe what it wasn't doing was rolling it back so much as it was just erasing the panel and not leaving my setting there, which I find obnoxious. Now, that's because I'm used to working in Lightroom. When I make the changes and I look at the panel, the changes are still there. So if I go back here to Edits, there are the edits. Maybe that works for you. For me, I'm not a fan of having things over on the other panel like that. I just want to grab things and go as I go through here and make my changes. And if I go back to hit develop, I would like to see my changes right here so I can go make those changes again. Tweak it up or tweak it down without having to go back to a secondary panel to go do something with it. I believe the midtones gave us the best contrast for the cloud. And if you'll notice, we're starting to get a little bit of that flame color back into the cloud. So I like that. Let me blur. I'm not really a fan of their creatives so much, so we're going to take those out. Color isn't going to do much for me. What I would like to do is make it look a little bit more cinematic. And That requires a color wheel to work from, basically. And that's this guy down here. So what we're going to do is we're going to make those shadows a little bit more blue. And we're going to make the highlights a little more yellow. So what we're doing down here is we're balancing out the existence of the color wheel. So if you are familiar with the color wheel, you'll know that cyan and red are on opposite sides of each other, magenta and green are on opposite sides, and yellow and blue are on opposite sides. When they're doing a cinematic shoot, they're doing a movie, you'll see these highlights be yellow and the shadows be blue, and that's basically what you're looking at for the cinematic representation of an image. And you can see the difference here. You can see how it went from this to this, looking much more cinematic. You'll notice that the shadows got much darker by having that blue in there. So did their uniforms. So probably we're going to have to go over here and into develop, and we're going to bring that exposure back up. Now again, if you have it all in the one panel, it makes it much easier to work with, because now that I'm in here, you'll notice that I'm not looking at my final image, I'm looking at that particular piece. So I have to kind of go back and forth. So something you keep in mind, if you're going to do it that way, you could stack your edits. I could go into here to develop and just start increasing this so that I have a brightening one and a darkening one to balance each other out by just moving this up, because I don't want to lose the detail in their outfits while I do this. And overall, I'm happy with the image the way it came out in Luminar Neo. It has that cinematic feel to it. I've dropped some more of this into the shadow so it's out of the way. I would most likely crop it, except for I want to keep these guys in the photo. So this does have an erase tool, which you can use to paint over anything that's distracting. Now, because he's in the shadow, most of him isn't that bad being there, because he'll basically disappear into the background anyway. See how it does with the erase. I would want grass up here where the shadow line is, and then him to disappear, so we'll see what the AI does for it. And these do take a little while to process. And it did a pretty good job of taking him out of the image. We'll clear that little section out because I can see it just a bit and it's distracting. And there we go. So we have a cinematic image. We have removed things that would be distracting to the image itself. We've made it more cinematic by bringing the shadows into blue and the rest of the highlights into a more yellow. We've seen how we can go back and modify things that we've done previously by going into the edits at the top. And we've seen how we can take an image and modify it based on the edits tool as opposed to using the presets in Luminar Neo. Now again, certain things in here are AI based, Erase is supposed to be AI based because it has to figure out what it's removing. But the ones that are AI based usually have an AI after them. And then there's a structure. And structure is, as you can see from the little drop down on it here, the detail and the clarity. So it's kind of like what we were doing with the contrast. So let's just dial that up and see what it does. And it just seems to increase that clarity just a little bit. In other words, it's giving a little bit more contrast than what I'd already done previously. It brings more depth into the grass. I think it's helped out the clouds here just a little bit. Yep, it's just a little bit more clarity to the image. And I'm happy with it. At that point, you just click apply. And for me, I came in from Lightroom. So what this will do is put the image back into my Lightroom category or catalog with all of these edits in place. So that's what I got for you this week. And next week, we'll take a look at another tool. Have a great week.